Using your passwords that are not personal, keep them separate from your work. And when you're strategizing and planning for natural disasters and what that looks like, also plan for downtime and what that looks like. I feel like if we would do that as a healthcare industry, if or when we experience that downtime, it would not be so traumatic.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
Joining us today is a powerhouse duo, Carmel Pound and Niesan Emara, two very experienced perioperative nurses who are going to be discussing the reality of cyber attacks with us today. And with a theme like disaster preparedness, we have to talk about the reality of cyber attacks. A recent report on securityintelligence.com said that healthcare has the largest rate of cyber attacks over any other industry. And the average cost of a healthcare data breach was $10.93 million in 2023. Higher than any other industry, and over double the average of all industries at $4.45 million. Also, the healthcare industry has seen a 239% increase in large data breaches reported to the Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights over the last 4 years. So we definitely need to have this discussion because it is a when, not an if type of threat. And Carmel and Niesan have so much to teach us today. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Carmel Pound and Niesan Emara.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now are Carmel Pound and Niesan Emara. Carmel has over 20 years of experience in healthcare and has served in several positions in perioperative services. And she recently completed an assignment as a travel nurse. Niesan is an internationally educated nurse from the Philippines who has extensive experience in perioperative services. In her 36 years, she has served in different roles from staff nurse to nurse educator and currently in nursing leadership. She is managing 6 departments in perioperative services at St. Luke's Health in Sugar Land, Texas. Carmel, Niesan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, too. Thank you for this opportunity, Melanie.
Oh, I am so excited to talk to you both today. You both gave a presentation at the OR Manager Conference last year entitled Cyber Attacks Are Real. Are you ready? And as soon as I saw you on the schedule and I saw that title, I thought, oh, we have got to have them on the podcast because I knew that we were having this conversation and we were going to be having a theme of disaster preparation, and cyber attacks fit right into that theme. And I'm so excited to have this conversation and include it in this podcast season. But before we dive into this topic of cyber attacks and cybersecurity, why don't we take a minute and just learn a little bit more about you both? Niesan, why don't you go first and just introduce yourself to everyone?
My name is Niesan Emara. So I have said in the introduction that I am an internationally educated nurse from the Philippines and graduated in 1985 and migrated to the US in 1988 and been a nurse for more than 35 years. Now I have passion in perioperative services, which where I practice my years nursing. And I love operative. From there, I did not change service. This is where I think I belong.
Awesome. And Carmel, how about you?
Much like Niesan, I have been in and around Periop for a number of years. I was trained in Oklahoma and visited family here in Houston for a number of years before I got the bug to move here to Houston. We've been colleagues for a number of years, and our shared passion with education and quality improvement, we decided to partner together and say, hey, this is an all too common occurrence. Perhaps we can bring some awareness to our colleagues, especially healthcare, about cyber attacks because it happens too frequently, but you don't hear very much, information about it until after the fact. When we start discussing, how much revenue has been lost because of, downtime with Epic or any other charting system. But we want to be more proactive and get the word out so that, our colleagues are prepared if and when they find themselves in that particular situation.
Well, and I think that's what you did very well in your presentation at OR Manager. So why don't we kind of talk about that first and talk about this topic? You kind of told me kind of already what brought you to come up with that topic and why you wanted to present it. But what about an example? What does maybe a hypothetical cyber attack, what does that look like for a healthcare organization? Niesan, do you want to go ahead and answer that one?
Yes. So actually, the presentation have started when me and Carmel are nurses from the good old days where we used to the manual written, right? And then as we become more dependent on technology in healthcare to provide efficiency and quality of care, I thought that like cyber attack is becoming a concern. So then I reached out to Carmel and said, "Hey, Carmel, I would like to, or maybe we can present a presentation on preparing on cyber attack and how does it impact in healthcare because cyber attack is really going to impact patient care when it happens." And Carmel said, "Yes, that's a good idea." That's how we started in preparing for this presentation because we want to share and we want to help nurses who have not been in the pen and paper documentation, just depending on electronic documentation. And that's how it started because we want to share how to prepare these young nurses who have not been in that era of no computer.
Okay, so I actually have to say, you talk about pen and paper and charting, and I have been a nurse for 22 years. So when I started in nursing, yes, we had different electronic charting methods and stuff, but a lot of things were still on paper. But, throughout my career, we've seen so much more move electronically. And I've gotten to the point where when I interviewed for a job one time and they told me that they used paper charting, I about died. I was like, no, I cannot go back to paper charting. And I realized that everybody's not that way, but we have gotten so we've gotten so accustomed to our technology and to our documentation and charting being online that sometimes to think about going back to paper charting, I don't know that everybody would even know what to do if they had to chart on paper because we just don't do it anymore.
No, we don't. And, just throughout my travels and networking with nursing colleagues, we did some research before we gave that presentation. And a part of my questions when I would meet a new colleague was to ask them, where do you practice in the country? And after that initial question, one of the other questions I would ask them is, have you ever experienced a cyber attack? And quite a few nurses have said yes. And it's not what we would hope, maybe a few hours, which I think most of us are accustomed to a few hours, but it can last for days, even months. Recently, completed a travel nurse assignment in Vermont. And just through a casual conversation a few years back, some of my colleagues there were speaking about, trials and tribulations of going through a cyber attack. And just it was quite an ordeal when you're accustomed to your pen and paper or your computer, and now you have no computer. So you have to revert back to using pen and paper. And we have a whole host of colleagues now that are new to this profession and they've grown up with electronic devices. Well, very seldom may they really use a pen and paper except for maybe at work occasionally. And
I know.
yeah, and to be forced to go back and say, okay, now you have to document with pen and paper, they had to kind of, brush the cobwebs away and say, okay, what's my workflow look like now that I don't have the computer?
I don't even know where our downtime forms are at my current facility. And I think that we'll talk about that a little bit more with education and preparing for that and teaching people where those are. But I think about that and I'm like, if our systems went down, I don't even know where I would find the paper to chart on so that I could keep going. And I'm sure that you've heard, Niesan, Carmel, both of you have heard stories from other nurses about different times that there was an attack or the systems went down and they just didn't know what to do.
And as you mentioned, we'll talk about that a little bit later in some of the information that we gleaned, that what you can from not using your downtime forms every day. That's a whole nother challenge that you look at is not only locating, but we'll talk about that in just a second.
Yeah. So I'd like to hear an example of or a story about an attack on a healthcare facility. Do either one of you have a story you want to share about something or give an example of something that could happen to a hospital system?
So, Melanie, I've read in paper, I was doing the presentation and searching on what hospital that had a cyber attack. So it happened in the paper. It's already, anyways, it's open to the public, so it's not like something I cannot share. It was in the early of 2023. A hospital in Maryland, they didn't say what hospital, but a hospital in Maryland, and on January 30, resulted in a down network, and it was a breach of data, so suspected a cyber attack. And it could cause a financial burden. When there's a cyber attack, it could cause a financial burden to the facility. And it's not just that, is also it going to impact patient care. And there will be a disruption of patient care, especially in the OR. There going to be disruption of the OR operation, and the breach of data, that patients' protective informations are being accessed, and that is also one of the impact for cyber attack. And Carmel could add to that.
And thank you for asking that question, Melanie. In my travels with colleagues, I'll give you a flip side of that, maybe a hypothetical, right? If you can imagine coming in, and most of us, we do huddles in the morning when we come into work. We talk about how the day is going to progress. Well, part of our natural workflow is to access our computers and kind of see more information about our patients. Okay, well, you go to your computer and you realize that those systems are not accessible. And it's not just you, but you ask your leadership, and then you find out that this is more of a pervasive problem than what you first realized. Well, then it not only affects you as a nurse and your ability to get information, but imagine if your physicians are not able to access the patient's charts. And let's take that a step further. Suppose that when your patients come to surgery and they're going to the pre-op area or just administration, they're getting ready to check in. None of that information is available because it's all on a computer. So it can be a bit daunting. And patients, they put things to the side to come in just to have surgery. They dedicate the entire day. Can you imagine how frustrating it might be to come in to say, what do you mean you don't have my information? And that's not just one person, but everybody who comes through the door. And we're talking about patients, but what about those poor administrative staff? They're at a loss. They don't have that information at their fingertips, which is what we're accustomed to. So it is a problem that is truly, it's almost like going back into the Bronze Age, right? You don't have
Yeah.
information at your fingertips.
Right.
And it sets off almost widespread panic, and just imagine that. I can't imagine that as a nurse. I can't imagine even leaving my phone at home in the morning and I have to turn back around just to get this phone. So can you imagine not documenting? So this is the frustration, the anxiety, and the stress that could cause an entire department. I don't know, entire department, but in a whole hospital, maybe a hospital system. And to expound on that, what about a whole hospital system? And we're seeing in several states, and that has been documented in the media for cyber attacks. So it's not just one hospital system, but it can be in several states. And it can get pretty ugly when money is requested. Right now, I don't know personally, but only when I read in the media, or in news, that it gets pretty interesting. So that's, I can't imagine. I truly just can't imagine. So looking at from that perspective, and then approaching Nisa, and it's like, hey, I've never heard of this being discussed at one of our conferences. It's in the media and it talks about healthcare, but we are healthcare. We're part of healthcare. So why don't we discuss it more? So we decided to bring that presentation, and we just learned so much about how, as a healthcare system, how were we enabled to be able to bring documentation systems online because they're so expensive. So we did research and we went back and found the government early back in 2000, if you can remember Y2K, right?
Oh, yeah.
Mass hysteria.
Oh, my mom was
Y2K.
saving water bottles back in the back
Right.
shower and had all sorts of crazy things going on
All
because everything was
crazy
going to
things.
shut down. I remember.
But the age of computers were coming, and healthcare had to grapple with how are we going to be able to not only just keep our patients safe, but besides keeping our patients safe, how will we be able to talk to each other? We're able to talk to each other, and we're in 3 different geographical locations, which is awesome, right? Now,
Yeah,
can you
technology is
imagine?
amazing.
It's amazing. Can you imagine trying to be able to do that back in 2000? I never would have thought about it, right? So the government set up through legislation the possibility that if you were to receive funds from Medicare and Medicaid, then you could partner with the federal government to receive funds to start your own documentation system. And that was known back in the early 2000s as the HITECH Act. And part of that HITECH Act was if you were to experience some sort of cyber attack, one of the things that was required of you as an entity that would have protected healthcare information, you would need to notify people of potential breaches of information. And so we always think, oh, that's really awesome. That's really nice of them to notify people. But no, it's not out of, being nice, which it is nice, but it's because they are required to do so by the federal government. And when AT&T was breached not too long ago, they were also required to notify their patrons and their customers about potential breaches of information. So we've learned so much just by doing research. And again, that research is there, but as nurses, we never think about.
We don't hear about it as often. And actually, I got a letter in the mail from AT&T with their recent breach. And I'm like, yay, something else to worry about. And then I use a credit monitoring service already and, got some notifications on some other things that were going on with my possible email address and social security number. So, you go back in and you do these freezes and all this other stuff to protect yourself. But when you think about that, on an astronomical scale of a healthcare system and how much it can affect. And, I'm actually appreciative that you brought up the poor people working at the front desk on a day if everything was attacked and everything was shut down and you didn't have your computer systems and you have people coming in for surgery, they're anxious, they're worried already, and now we don't have their information. And so then there's that stress and anxiety usually comes out as anger and aggression to the poor person at the front desk who has absolutely no control over any of it. And I'm sure that they bore the brunt of a lot of frustration. And I can only imagine how awful those days were for those people. And so to think about how those people are affected, how our entire health system is affected if something happens. And Niesan, I'm curious to hear from you too. What is it that you really learned as you studied and researched for this presentation and in the information that you were looking at? Or even if you have any statistics that you maybe picked up on about how often health systems are attacked. I'd love to hear that.
Yes, so from this presentation, from searching, and it became a realization that healthcare facility is a target to cyber attackers because we have all informations that are these attackers could use it for ransom, right? So I was so surprised when I was doing my search on this presentation that there were a lot of organizations, not just hospital, that had already paid a lot of money for ransom to get their internet back or their network back. As just I give you a hypothetical example in surgery. For example, that how it impact patient care in surgery. You're doing an orthopedic surgery, and then nowadays we don't print the X-ray film anymore. We open your computer, and then you check. How's the fracture? How does it look like for the doctor to know how to fix it? Then, if the network just suddenly went down, now you have no access, right? So then it will be delay of care because you have to go to the X-ray and print the X-ray film for the doctor to see and evaluate how's the fracture and how he's going to treat it. So it is really an awareness. We need to have an awareness and understand that it is real. As I have searched, I realized like this is real, and we have to be aware and accept that this is real. You cannot just take it for granted because it's going to impact your disruption in facility to provide patient care. So just if you're aware and you are ready, you have all your downtime form, you know that when it happens, you have to access in your organizations, whatever, where you keep your downtime form, and it's there, and you don't have to struggle in looking for what do I use. So it's all laid there. You have the forms available. Carmel can add to that, and I'll go look. And I think I have a note here of what are the percentage and how much some organization have paid. I have to go through over my notes because
sure,
I don't
absolutely.
remember the numbers.
That's okay. Let me throw it to Carmel, and you can look while Carmel's talking. But Carmel, Niesan really set us up to discuss being prepared and being ready, because this is not a when, it is an if type of event. Statistics do show us that healthcare is the most widely attacked when it comes to cyber attacks. And so what do we need to do to be prepared? She already mentioned downtime forms, but can you go into that a little bit more in depth?
Be happy to. Downtime forms, it's something that for those of us who work in the OR, when we have a difficult intubation, we seek out our trick tray. You follow me? When you need it, you need it. You don't have time to say, where's my trick tray? I mean, it's an emergency situation. It's the downtime forms are almost like that. They lie in obscurity until you actually need them.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And sadly to say, the downtime forms are there, but they're not really addressed until we really need them. In a previous life, I was part of a forms committee at a hospital, and we got together because we decided, there was a need for us to review forms. In our discussions, we realized that our forms were grossly antiquated compared to our current practice. So much so, a lot of times that the people who created those forms were no longer there. And
that's not helpful.
We could not even access the original copy of the form.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you see where I'm going?
Oh, yeah.
So they're so old. So can you imagine looking at your documentation, whatever that is, whether it's Epic or Cerner or Meditech, and then you go back to your downtime forms, they're probably discolored, for one thing.
Or they got streaks all over them where there have been copies of copies of copies.
Exactly. They're kind of, you may have to clear the dust off a little bit. So, we learned, again, anecdotally through some of our colleagues who've been through horrible events like this, that, there was a need to periodically look at your downtime forms. Epic and Cerner goes through an update probably every quarter. Well, those updates do not transfer over to your downtime forms. So it can be years, your documentation, your electronic medical record can be years ahead of your downtime forms. So, if you could find a way to update those at least maybe once a year, along with your Epic or your Cerner upgrades, that would be wonderful. But that's just one of the things that we gleaned from that. And Epic and Cerner and other electronic documentation, we use it so much to just glean information, especially if we have unusual rise in a particular microorganism, right? We need to be able to trace that. Well, we use that electronic documentation to be able to figure out what were the touch points throughout that patient's transition into perioperative services. Without that electronic documentation, it's not so easy to glean what did that day look like for that one particular patient. So again, we're losing information, we're losing data. We're not only because we're losing data, we're losing money. We don't accurately know how to charge patients for minutes of surgery. Most of us do most of our charges for each case along with, when you're documenting. So you have your downtime forms, but your downtime forms don't correlate with the particular products that you use in OR.
Oh my gosh, no, they do not. I have done that. We've had to go to Downtime Forms, and I'm looking at the charge sheet, and I'm like, this isn't any of our stuff anymore. Like, we had completely shifted to full packs for our
Exactly,
cases.
right?
And then over here on my charge sheet, I've got individual items for everything, except reality says the charge goes by the pack, not by the individual item. But my downtime charge form was wrong. So yes, I totally know what you're talking about.
So imagine this. I call them the package, right? We would have a package of items from things that we'd open. So we would need to document some sort of way everything that was used on that patient. Now, some charges are bundled, like you said, with your packs, but some things are not. And like you said, we were consistently changing, vendors, and we're finding the most cost efficient way to bring that surgery to that patient. Well, downtime forms don't reflect that. So you lose just so much revenue because that information does not cross over. So, we're looking at the potential for, and I'm saying potential, I'm not saying that anyone's harm, but the potential for patient harm, right? Because you don't have the information at your fingertips. Again, I can only give you an analogy. If you lost your phone and you have all of your contacts on your phone and you're off on the side of the road and it starts to get, a little dusk outside, how are you going to contact somebody? I guess you can go and wave your hand.
And hope the nice person pulls over.
Right. Some nice person pulls over and say, hey, can I help you? So in a hospital, you don't have that luxury. So how do you, and the community comes to you and they say, hey, we need help. We have our mom, our grandmother, our child who's not doing well. What are you going to do for us? And they're in panic. And we're almost in panic and wondering, yeah, what do we do?
Right.
So
yeah, because we have everything. We have everything on our computers.
Everything.
We've got pref cards are all where we can pull up so that we can quickly get ready for a case. We have patient history. If a patient is a patient within the larger health system, then we have immediate access to their primary care visits, and we have their radiology or their MR, their pharmacy information, all of those different things that we have at our fingertips. And patients know that. So that's not like they're going to show up with their entire personal history that they can just necessarily always give us, because we can access all that. And so suddenly when you can't, you're stuck hoping you can get a full history from the patient, hoping you can get everything that you need so that you can then move forward and take care of them. So yeah, it's definitely, it's crippling, it's disabling, and it's it is very difficult.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel. We're starting this conversation. We're bringing this information to colleagues and to those leaders and unofficial leaders in the OR. They're now armed with information. We've given them the hypothetical situations. We've given them information about downtime forms. So now they can go back and say, hey, we need to look at our downtime forms. But, to start this process off, we always need a starting place. We have those wonderful leaders who get together and come up with a plan, and they talk about this, they plan for this, they strategize about this. Use your downtime forms. First course of action. If that documentation system is down, one of the first things you're going to do is start with your downtime forms. Well, we as nurses are accustomed to that. But healthcare is not just nurses. Healthcare is physicians. Healthcare is pharmacy. Healthcare is laboratory services. Healthcare is radiology. Healthcare are, what about our unlicensed staff? So it's more than just nursing. We all, as a team, have to be on the same sheet of music. We're going to go to some sort of downtime form because we have to communicate. The electronic mode of communication is gone. So now we have to rely on pen and paper. What does that look like? And it's almost like you have to create a different workflow to
I can see that.
ensure,
Yeah.
yeah,
To
to
make sure that
ensure
you have
that
everything. Yeah, for sure.
exactly. And Nisa and I are tag teaming, but I'm gonna give this to Nisa, and I think Nisa might be able to tell you a little bit about bringing in the whole team, not just nursing. Nisa, can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would like to add first on the downtime form. We nurses, we are very creative. So what I did in my practice here in my organization is I created a form that mirrored the Epic scheduling. So if there is a down in our network, we can do manually and mirror whatever information that we need to write in our form so we can continue our operation in the OR when the network is down. So I created that, and in also coordination with other nurses in my unit. Every organization, you have your way of documenting or how you do the process of scheduling. So we are already creating that to get ready if something happen. And Carmel is right. This is a team effort, not just the OR nurse or OR team, because we work on interdepartmental. So we also going to work with the pharmacy, with the labs, with our patient center, because we work collaboratively. And how are we going to do it when our network is down? So that means we are going to do a manual calling over the phone. We cannot stop our patient care. Our focus here is patient safety. So we have to continue the care of the patient. There may be some delays because it's not like one click, you get the result, right? So every organization, I would like to recommend that we have to make a plan. When something was happen, you have to have an extra person to be a runner. You have to know what you have. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Melanie, the tube system,
Oh, yeah.
where we can tube results, and we need to have a runner. You have to know your fax number. And yes, you have to know what are your resources when network is down and you don't have a computer. So that is very important. As you asked me before in statistics, and when I researching on this topic, I cross into this blog, which is the cost of healthcare breach in the US is $10.93 million average. And it is increasing in 53% in the 3 years, according to IBM in 2023, the cost of data breach. And the healthcare industry has had the highest average cost of breach for the last 13 years. So
That's
those
wild.
are, I have to find my notes.
No, that's okay. But
You're
those
ready.
statistics tell us a lot. And actually, this is a good shifting point because we've talked about just these astronomical costs and the risk associated with a data breach or a cybersecurity attack. And we've talked about the fact that it's not just nurses that are using technology in our health systems. Everybody is. Everybody has access to a computer. Everybody has a work-based email, or they have access where they could be the potential target of a phishing scheme or some type of scam where then they expose the entire facility to risk. So, Carmel, why don't you just give us a little bit of everyday advice so we can think about how we can be safer online and protect ourselves and protect our facilities?
Oh, I love it. One of the most fundamental things that I recently learned: change your password. Don't use the same password for your personal correspondence at home, use at work. It should be something different, because if a hacker can access your personal information, right, and they can retrieve some sort of way, the last five passwords you've used, most of us use common things like birthdays, when we got married or something of that nature. So if they can access that, all they would need is, most of the time, your email address is usually our username, right? So all they would have to do, if they're intuitive enough and with enough resilience, they can go in and kind of figure out what are your passwords and just randomly keep entering that information until they get access. So don't make it easy for them. Use something at work that you wouldn't use at home and make it unique as much as possible. Another thing we talk about on an annual basis, we prepare for natural disasters. My suggestion, in addition to those natural disasters, talk about during when you're strategizing how that might look, plan for when your documentation system goes offline. And it's not only your documentation system, but because that documentation system speaks with other systems like your payroll system, perhaps. Yeah. So you need to plan for all of it. It's not just natural disasters, but it's when you're not able to communicate. Look at your strategy from that perspective. And if you look at that, you would be surprised of all of the processes that you never really were open to, right? Where we are weakest. So using your passwords that are not personal, keep them separate from your work. And when you're strategizing and planning for natural disasters and what that looks like, also plan for downtime and what that looks like. I feel like if we would do that as a healthcare industry, if or when we experience that downtime, it would not be so traumatic.
That is excellent advice. That is very good, Carmel.
Oh, you're welcome.
Absolutely.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Okay,
you don't
Lisa.
think about putting cyber attacks right up there with your natural disasters, but it's just
No.
as much of a reality as a natural disaster. So we need to be as
Yeah.
prepared as well, for sure. All right,
Exactly.
Niesan, what do you have to add to that?
Yes, we have to be aware or understand that we are also a source for cyber attack because we are so dependent on our phone, right? So the rise of email use on mobile phones, it's also potential for cyber attack. So making sure that, again, Carmel had mentioned password, and also every organization, they have cyber attack education. So do not ignore it. Listen to it. Don't move forward just to finish to the end.
Don't just click through it.
Yes, just to finish it, but understand. Because by understanding, you will be able to know how to recognize what it looks like. If it's a phishing email, there is a malware or anything, it looks suspicious. So awareness and education is very important. So whenever there is an education on a cyber attack, listen and understand, because education is powerful by knowing what it looks like. Because in my organization, we have phishing email, a test, right? And if you fail that phishing email, you will be back to another education.
So learn it the first time. Right.
Yes, so you have to. And then there's in our email, it says if it's a phishing email, report. And usually this phishing email are very tricky. They will tell you, because it happened to me. I think there was like, oh, you won something, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't look whose email from. And I clicked because it said I won, right?
Right.
It's very catchy. Oh, I won. So you click it. And then there you go. It's a phishing email. Then I have to repeat my cyber security education again. So, that's why I said, please educate yourself and make it serious, because it's something for you to educate on how to suspicious email. Because right now at work, we can access our email through our phone. Everything is accessible on your phone, and you go somewhere and even you go to outside the country and you're using your phone and you're using password you're using the Wi-Fi in the hotel, and that's also another source that you could be
be attacked by
cyber attackers, because they're everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. I actually just did my cybersecurity training for the year this morning prior to our prior to this podcast. So I feel very prepared. We talked all about phishing and all about, email addresses being just a little bit different and, checking those sources and maybe even picking up the phone and calling if you get an email from human resources that says they need personal information, so all of those good pieces of advice to just remember when you get emails at work or when you're selecting those passwords and the ways that you can keep yourself safe online. But Carmel, Niesan, this has been a very enjoyable and enlightening conversation. And it always goes by faster than I ever want it to. But I really appreciate you both first taking the time to learn more about this topic so that you can educate others on it, but then also spending time with me today so that we can continue to have the conversation and educate others about the importance of cyber attacks. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome, Melanie. It was a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to share what we know from this topic, and we were so honored that we get a chance to present this in our manager, and you invited us to share again what we know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. That was Carmel Pound and Niesan Emara sharing real-world examples and some lessons learned and how to develop a strategy in the event of a cyber attack. Our systems are vulnerable and healthcare systems are at high risk for an attack. And we have to be prepared when something happens. So we also have to be diligent in training our employees about online safety and preparing them so that they know what to do if the systems go down and they know how to communicate if they don't have access to a computer. Niesan and Carmel gave us a lot to think about today, and I hope that you take away something that you can implement at your facility, learn where those downtime forms are, but also take the time to change those passwords, to think about what you're using and how safe you are when you are online, and recognize that, once again, cyber attacks are a when, not if event, and all of us need to be ready so that we can protect ourselves and protect our facilities while we're using technology. That's going to do it for this week's episode. On behalf of the whole team here at First Case, thanks for listening to this week's podcast.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.